Well, the first half of yesterday went really quite well. I'll put a video together of the footage that I do have, but the trip started as most all of my trips always do. I was late leaving. That's kind of my MO. Made some pretty good progress down through BC towards the border. And I get to the border. There's a couple of things that were bugging me on the way down there about malls, but things that I was going to let slide because functionally the engine was running okay. What I mean by that is there was some interesting shifting issues, and I have a feeling that has a lot more to do with the weight that was on the bike than anything else. I was just going to keep chugging along. That was my plan. Get to the border where I was actually going to cross over into the United States. I stop so that I can go take a leak, grab a coffee maybe, do what I would normally want to do to get ready for actually crossing the border and making it as efficient as possible. And malls wouldn't start back up. Like, would not start. Not from a lack of voltage or anything like that in the battery. The starter solenoid just would not engage, no matter what. And although I could bump start malls when she's warm, that's not a problem. When she's cold, so the next morning, I just knew that that was going to be a bit of an issue. So it turns out my trip, at least this one, got ruined for want of one of two parts. Either a starting solenoid. Yes, this has seen better days. Or in hindsight, what it also could have been is the actual start switch. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to figure out which of those two things it actually was. My trip has effectively been canceled. I guess as I get older and I have more responsibilities, and it just, me 5-10 years ago would have just said, forget it, I'll just go. I'll figure out how to bump start the bike every day, even if I have to push the bike to a hill wherever I'm staying, and do it that way. With the other issues that I was having with the bike, little issues, and then that being the kind of cherry on top, I decided the universe was likely trying to tell me that I was rushing into this and that I should take a step back and rethink it. My mom would be heartbroken if I didn't show up in Arizona, so we're going with plan B, and I got a flight, and I'll have to drive down to Seattle in the truck on Tuesday and fly out, go and see the family, enjoy it, because I do really want to see everyone. It's just, I was really counting on being able to do another big, long motorcycle trip, not just one day of heavy riding, but 3 days down and then 3 days back. Really kind of nostalgic for me because I really, really enjoy doing it, and there will be other opportunities in the future. I'm not going to let this riding season go to waste. Malls is not a valuable bike in the sense of if I wanted to sell it, I probably wouldn't get a whole lot for it, but there is so much sentimental attachment to this bike. The thought of having to abandon it somewhere in the United States would be heartbreaking. So it wasn't an option. What I did is I just hopped on the bike, got it going, bump starting it, and rode north from the border, and then headed back west and stopped in Langley. There's a great motorcycle shop there, Bent Motorcycles, and the guys were just incredibly helpful. I wanted to get a second opinion, also resolve the solenoid not working issue. So I bought a new starting solenoid from them and kind of got their impression on how malls sounded when the engine was running. That's the other drawback that I have is I don't have another version of this bike. I don't have another motorcycle, frankly, to kind of compare the sound to. So to me, malls sounds like malls. But to someone with a trained ear that listens to a lot of other motorcycles on a regular basis, even they kind of thought, wow, that sounds a little bit rough. So his gut said that it was either clearance on the pistons themselves, or it was the cam chain, like timing chain, that might be a little bit loose and floppy. Sloppy? One of those. So I thought, the best thing to do is really come home, put my tail between my legs, ride home, whinge about it a little bit, and then I have a couple of days before my flight, so I can spend some time solving the solenoid issue, figuring out if it's the starter, the actual starter button, or if it's the solenoid itself. Like I said, I do have a replacement anyway, so it's not the end of the world. And here I had a second starter switch, so I can see what's going on, and then spend some time readjusting the cam chain and the valves and making sure that everything is operating the way it should, and that if it still sounds kind of rough the way it has been lately, then I know something else needs to be done. I just noticed too, that's actually touching. It's now heated right through. That's great. Why is that touching there? It shouldn't be. Because it's loose? Yeah. Ah, for fuck's sakes. Always something. So that's now burnt through. I'm gonna have to tape that up and make sure it doesn't rust from the inside out. Jeez. You'd almost think that I have no formal training as a mechanic or something. Oh yeah. Anyways, I gotta drink a beer, work on the bike a little bit, and I'll figure out what exactly went wrong with the starter yesterday, and that will be this video. So I appreciate you guys tuning in for a few minutes just to check what's going on, and I'm sad to say that I won't have a bunch of footage from a road trip right now to share with you, but we'll get Malls up and running order. I'll go on my trip, I'll come back, and then I'll carve some time out later on this year to do a Canada specific road trip or something, just because it's with having to quarantine and everything when I come back from the States right now, it's kind of a pain in the ass. So either things will improve that way, and I can do another trip down south, or we'll do when things warm up more here in Canada, and I wouldn't risk driving into snow or something if I do a trip past Calgary through Alberta or something. Then I'm gonna plan a nice trip, maybe head north here in BC, or head east through Alberta. Do something. We'll do something that's interesting and kind of gets this need for me to go on a trip and put myself through the ordeal of a solo motorcycle trip and all the joys and frustrations that come with it. I'm definitely still going to do that. So stay tuned, and let me figure this out real quick, and I'll update this before I post the video. Appreciate it, guys. Prior to that, just remember that I appreciate you guys tuning in and checking out what's happening with me and Malls. And until next time, ride safe and ride fun, and I'll see you on the next video. So, update. Turns out the starter solenoid is fine. Does mean I now have a spare and a backup and a brand new one for when it does fail, because it's old. This is the new starter solenoid here. This is the old one hooked up. This is a different starter switch, obviously, and no problem. This switch, come in. This switch here does not work. This one clearly does. And one more little tip that I would just like to point out to everybody. Obviously, the switch was bad on this one. So if you know that your starter solenoid is good and you just need to get your bike going, here's a little trick that you can use. Let's make sure everything is on, good to go. So we're going to take this guy out right here. Sorry, we'll take this guy out right here. And if I just go, boink. So it's a convenient way of just, the switch, let's say the original switch is hooked up and isn't working, then I can pull that lead out. So the positive lead that feeds the starter solenoid, and just bypass the entire switch by jumping it. So obviously the convenience there is you don't get stuck somewhere when you know that your bike could start, but your switch isn't working, or if you're just trying to troubleshoot your starter solenoid. Just a little tip if it's helpful for anybody in the future. But turns out my starter solenoid was fine. It is my starter switch itself that is not working. It's a two-phase switch, so I kind of thought it was still working correctly, simply because as you're pressing the starter in on this model, partway down it disconnects the headlights and your running lights, probably to ensure, I don't know the exact reason. My gut says the reason for doing that would be to either ensure that you have enough electricity that the battery isn't feeding anything else for that moment that it's trying to power the starter solenoid, or for when the engine turns on, maybe there's a reason why you don't want electricity feeding everything. My gut says it's the first one. Maybe if somebody knows better than I do why they engineer them that way, then drop a comment below. I'd be very curious to hear what it is. But because the starter, as I press it in, it would make the lights flash the way I expect, I didn't think for a second that the starter switch wasn't working. Well, it turns out that that's like, it's a two-phase button. So as you're pressing it down, partway down, it disconnects the running lights and things like that. And then when it gets to the bottom of the button's travel length, I guess is what I'm looking for. But at the bottom of it, it actually engages the starter solenoid, and that's clearly not working with the old starter switch. So yeah, that was it. That was the straw that broke a camel's back that had me stop my trip early. But I just want to rehash again that that wasn't the only reason. If that was the only thing that was going on with it, if I hadn't had other concerns during the day, then I definitely would have just proceeded and continued. But there is something that, although I tested Malls and I tuned her up and I did everything that I would normally do before a trip, things just didn't feel quite right. And to plan 3,000 kilometers in one direction and then 3,000 kilometers back, you really want to make sure, especially with a bike this old, that would be difficult to get serviced. If something goes wrong, it's very unlikely that a shop is going to have the parts that I need to replace whatever fails. So you're looking at potentially weeks to get a bike fixed, if you can even find a shop that will work on an older bike like that. So it's just one of those things where I was skirting a disaster by deciding to continue, and I was much better off taking a step back, swallowing my pride, and saying, you know what, let's go home. Let's spend some time making sure that Malls is in peak working order before I decide to go on a trip like that with her. As disappointing as that is, it's life. Life goes on. And to anyone else that's working out there, if something goes wrong with your bike, it's not the end of the world, but just play it smart, you know? And I already did the outro. So I'll see you guys on the next video.